Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the first council meeting of 2022, the regular council meeting of the Municipality of Thames Centre, Monday, January 10th, 2022 at 1 p.m. Since our last meeting, as predicted, the Omicron variant has spread like wildfire. Here in Thames Centre, we have seen friends and families reporting that they have COVID. I personally have never seen so many people that are in my circle of friends who have caught it. Although this variant is reportedly milder, it still means that our hospitals and emergency services are facing at times overwhelming demands. Yesterday, we hosted a successful vaccination clinic and 408 people received their vaccinations. These clinics will continue to be hosted throughout the county and provide a way for people to get a booster without making an appointment. Please keep up the good work and take the time to get the booster shot. Remembering to support our small businesses is still extremely important. Our restaurants once more are hit hard under the recent restrictions, and once more they are still available for takeout options. I am looking forward to 2022. We have a lot of exciting projects to look forward to this year in Thames Centre. Let's work together and get through this month, and we will have a safe and healthy summer. So I'm going to call this meeting to order. Are there any additions to the agenda?
There are no additions.
Thank you. Any disclosure of pecuniary interest? Seeing none. I'm moving on. Any announcements? No, seeing none, then I am going to ask now. We've moved into our presentations and delegations. We have a presentation that's called Roles, Responsibilities, and Challenges Ahead for Municipal Council. Really looking forward to hearing this. And thank you to Nigel Belchamber and Fred Dean from Amberley Gavel for taking their time to be here today. Gentlemen, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Your Worship. Before I bring the slides up on the screen, I just wanted to, just in case it doesn't show, I'm Nigel, and that will allow you to figure out who's Fred. But I'll just bring the presentation up, and I presume everybody can see it. We appreciate the opportunity to be here with you today. We're here at your request, and congratulations on making that request. I think ongoing education is a really important feature for a successful municipal council. We've done this sort of presentation with many councils over the last year, but I think that many more would benefit from it based on the reaction we've had. The key areas that we're going to focus on are the roles of elected and appointed officials, because they are different, and the appropriate behavior by both in an era of enhanced transparency and intense public scrutiny. And that's only going to grow as we move into the 2022 election cycle. This workshop will take us about 1.5 to 2 hours, including time for questions. So
Nigel, can I interrupt you for a second?
Please
Sorry.
do, yes.
Okay. Did you say you were sharing your screen and assuming we could see it? Is that?
I did, yes.
Okay. So we can't. So
okay. I used the share screen option. Let me see what happens here on Zoom. Because I was given the panelist ability to add in.
yeah, our IT is nodding his head affirming that. So we're just going to see.
Let me just see. Just go to the Zoom. Let me see what Zoom did to me. How many versions of Zoom are actually running? You can still hear me okay?
Yes, we
Loud
can.
and clear.
That's interesting. Okay. There we are. So let's go to the share screen again. All right. You can probably see, can you see that on your screen yet?
No.
No.
Not
Oh,
yet.
yes. Hang on.
You can see that now, can't you?
It's coming. Yep. There we go.
So now you need to see the the slideshow. And that coming up?
Got it.
Now you got it. Okay. All right. Super. Thank you. Well, let's go back to the start. Obviously, the technologically challenged person here is Nigel, not Fred. So you can, I'll take full responsibility for that. So who are we? Who's Amberley Gavel? Well, basically it's Fred and I, and we've had others join us from time to time on special projects, but let me tell you a little bit about Fred and myself. I'll cut it short, but Fred does practiced municipal law for over 40 years in Ontario. And while practicing, he was city solicitor for the city of Sudbury for 23 of those years, which meant that you either saw it, fixed it, caused it, made it go away, whatever you ask your solicitor to do for you. And following early retirement from Sudbury, Fred's practiced for the last 21 years, or up until last year, in private practice for most of that period of time. And in fact, he worked for other municipalities before Sudbury as well. Today, Fred likes to be known as a municipal coach. He advises municipalities from across Ontario in procedures, and he has an extensive training program that he conducts for municipal staff. I've been involved since the 1970s in local government administration, and I've served during that time, part of that time as a CAO. I've been a city treasurer. I've been a municipal clerk. I've been an executive, a member of a number of municipal associations. Together, Fred and I, over the last couple of decades, quite frankly, have done over 100 training sessions. In fact, it's closer to 200 now for municipal heads of council and municipal staff. And we've served as closed meeting investigators. We actually functioned through local authority services as closed meeting investigators for 132 municipalities for a number of years. In fact, from the inception of closed meeting investigations right up until about 2018. We've served as integrity commissioner for a number of municipalities as well, up until 2020. And we've done numerous sessions for CAOs and senior managers. So we've had some pretty broad experience as municipal trainers and municipal advisors, and as municipal administrators over that period of time. So that's where we come from, and we continue to be actively involved. So what are we hearing from across the province? Well, we're hearing things like, this is the most dysfunctional council, or our meetings should be more focused. Members are commenting for the sake of commenting. More disturbingly, we're hearing members are getting involved in bylaw enforcement, which is always a challenge and sometimes a legal difficulty. Staff are not respected. Members of council are getting into the weeds. We've got heads of council saying, I'm concerned we're going to lose staff. CAOs are saying that too. Clearly, the comment, we're incredibly busy despite and or because of the pandemic, is something that is well understood. Frankly, some members are already fighting the next election. Well, it is 2022 and the election is in 2022. So don't be surprised if the temperature heats up a little bit as we go through the year. Someone said, if I'd known what's going to be like in 2018, I wouldn't have run. That's a disappointment, quite frankly. And finally, people have said, I'm worried this is going to cost us in so many ways. In order to help deal with some of these issues, the goals in this session that we've put in place are, how can council members stay out of the weeds and simultaneously enhance services? Because it can be done. Ways to improve the conduct of meetings. How policies, process, and codes can be improved. Complaints avoided. And I want to start off by giving you a little bit of surprising history about local government. Before I do that, Fred, I cut you off. I didn't give you the ability to say hello. Would you like just to say hello before we get into it?
Absolutely. I'm really pleased to be here, and congratulations to council on undertaking this training. I think it's any time during the term, it's really significant. And Nigel, the slides you're going to cover in the next few minutes, I think, are really an excellent background to all of the material we're going to be covering today. So, Your Worship, thank you for the opportunity.
Thanks, Fred. So the provincial municipal relationship has changed enormously in recent years, but it's been creeping change. The courts have continued to reinforce the provincial supremacy, even though the relationships have changed. And that's as recent as the Supreme Court decision about the City of Toronto and the ability of the province to cut the number of councillors in half at the last election. You may remember that. That worked its way through the system. What was said was that municipalities are entirely the creature of provincial statutes and can therefore only exercise those powers which are explicitly conferred on them by provincial statute. That's clear. You don't have any authority outside what the province grants you and the associated powers to achieve those service ends. But the manner of provincial control has changed dramatically, but gradually. And it's a little bit like the story of boiling a frog. You may be familiar with the story where if you put a frog in hot water, it'll jump out immediately. If you put a frog in cool water and turn the temperature up a little bit at a time, it'll stay there until it cooks. It's a little like that. The changes have not been as noticed by municipalities because, quite frankly, they've come over a significant amount of time. I think we're at some serious inflection points, but I'll give you some examples. It wasn't too long ago that before a municipality could enter into a lease or borrow money from a bank or issue a debenture, that it needed provincial approval in order to issue individual debt instruments, even on something as simple as a municipal drain. They needed approval of the Ontario Municipal Board. And I know that because I used to write reports whether or not those approvals should be granted in a former job that I did as a municipal supervisor for municipal affairs. The role of municipal affairs, municipal supervisors with hands-on responsibility is a thing of the past. The majority of ongoing provincial grants have been eliminated. At one time, there was an annual publication called the Municipal Grants Book, and it listed over 100 different provincial municipal programs that provided grants to municipalities. There are a couple of larger grants at the moment, and one is coming, has recently been increased, the OCIF or OCIF program. However, it's going to have some interesting strings attached that if we had another hour, I could talk to you about. But basically, the majority of the targeted grants programs have been eliminated. The largest used to be the annual maintenance and capital conditional road grants programs. Up until the 1980s and into the 1990s, the municipal maintenance and capital programs for roads were really dictated by the province of Ontario because they gave you grants of anywhere from 50 to 91% of your expenditures. Why would you buy a grader with 100% municipal tax dollars if by waiting a year you could get the province to give you 91% of the cost? And that's what they did. Same with the construction or replacement of bridges. The province really determined when those expenditures were made. To do that, they used to keep an asset inventory of municipal roads and bridges. They had a series of municipal roads offices under the Ministry of Transportation across the province. They kept track. They knew what was there. That's long gone. You've had to recreate that yourselves. Interesting statistic I don't know if you can see it, but in 1997, the province transferred just shy of 5,000 kilometers of provincial highways to local governments. Now, most of those went to counties and upper tiers and single tier cities. along with some short-term funding. But most of you can remember when highways like Highway 2 and Highway 4 and others were provincial highways, as opposed to, I think Highway 73 or 76 is in your territory. Those were
23.
provincial highways rather than county roads. Now that you're now responsible through the upper tier for maintaining those roads. The province used to build sewer and water systems, and that was the province in its capacity as either the Ontario Water Resources Commission or the Ministry of the Environment, or actually Ontario Clean Water Agency. They actually owned and built many of the systems that are still in use today. Not all, but many of them. They gave them to municipalities. And when they gave them to municipalities, they actually gave on an ongoing obligation. And that's why the rates that we pay today are higher than we were paying when the province operated these systems, because we now have responsibility for maintenance. The provincial advisors who exercised oversight, they're gone. They were with Ministry of the Environment, they were with MTO, they were with MNR, they're virtually gone. Another good example is the province no longer approves individual subdivisions. It's not that long ago that it wasn't done at the upper tier, it was done by the province. And the upper tier didn't have that authority. That's fairly recent transition. You can all recall when land ambulance, I think, was transferred to municipalities, and along with the challenges that go with that, that again is a fairly recent change. Similarly, at the same time, social housing stock and funding was transferred as well. The land ambulance issue has been well run by municipal governments with some assistance in terms of provincial funding, although the provincial funding always lags the municipal expenditure, and you can never be sure that it'll continue. But the social housing issue is one that has yet to be addressed properly, and it's going to continue to be an issue for a number of years. There's some more changes in this process. School boards used to be able to levy property taxes. No, they can't. The province took over the funding of education. The education property taxes were dramatically reduced, but that tax room was made available to municipalities. What was it for? Well, in order to fill in the areas that the province backed away from. For instance, the province used to run and pay for the assessment function. Now you pay for it, but quite frankly, the province still runs it. The province appoints the board of the Municipal Property Assessment Corporation. They set the legislation. They determine when it's going to be updated, as we now know, and you deal with the consequences, but you pay for it. That's an interesting challenge. It's not exactly safe or pay. The total revenue and service swap that was done in the late 90s and early 2000s, the province indicated that they thought it would be revenue neutral. The Ontario Auditor General confirmed that it was not. It was in favor of the province in the short term, even, not necessarily just the long term. Municipal governments and property taxpayers and the user fees have picked up those the difference. How do we pick up the difference? Well, for instance, there's been a push in the last 20 years to move water and wastewater rates to full cost recovery. I'm sure most of you are familiar with the water rate reviews that you're required to have done in order to keep your rates fully financing system maintenance and to some degree renewal and expansion. In order to make sure you do it, the province changed water regulations after Walkerton and legislation to include personal responsibility for staff and council members. They really wanted you to pay attention to your responsibilities, and that included the rate responsibilities by making it possible for you to be charged personally, to be sent to jail if you breach the legislation, and also to be personally fined. So it was a serious change, and it continues today. But as the guy on TV says, when he's selling cleaning cloths or ShamWow or whatever else he's selling, but wait, there's more. Province has mandated fixed asset accounting. Now, that's a good thing, okay? And I could tell you my involvement with that, but I think it's really important that municipalities now recognize, just like businesses do, the value and the amortization or depreciation of the assets that they have that provide service and the estimated replacement useful life. And in fact, in order to make sure that you recognize that, the province has done a couple of things. They've got an asset management regulation in place that was put in place in 2017, just updated this past year, that extended out the timelines for a couple of key elements to 2022 and 2025. But very clearly, that is going to be a very important part of your municipal financing data on a go-forward basis. You recently received an updated allocation of the Ontario Community Investment Fund, I think, or Community Infrastructure Fund. In fact, the province doubled the amount. They've done it based on an estimate, based on what we currently report. You're going to have to update your reporting by 2023 to include replacement cost. It won't be in your budget. It won't be in your financial statements, but you will be required to provide estimates of the replacement cost of all of your fixed assets. That is the core assets: roads, bridges, transit, water, and wastewater. So those will be really important because that's going to be the basis for redistributing or distributing the OSIF money 2023 and beyond. It's right there in their announcement. In order to help municipalities, and I think it was a useful change, the Municipal Act was streamlined. A lot of the detail was taken out. Said, municipalities, you figure out how you're going to deliver service. You don't need to have separate bylaws for fire equipment, fire staff, fire chief, fire vehicles. You can have a single bylaw to operate a fire department. Gives you broad authority to make determinations. That's fine. And there was quite a number of areas that were streamlined. However, what the province did at the same time, and to some degree subsequently, they've increased the number of mandatory municipal policies that you must have. For instance, you now have to have a purchasing bylaw, a procurement bylaw, and it has to be quite detailed. And I know you have one. You have to have a hiring policy. How do you hire new staff? What's the policy? In fact, it has to speak to the employment of relatives. How does nepotism figure into it, or how do you avoid it, or how do you deal with it? It's not necessarily a bad thing, but how do you deal with it? You need to give notice to the public of your proposed actions. Those are proposed actions at a council meeting. You have to give notice of all of your council meetings, and there are certain specific actions like road closures that you have to give specific notice for. You have to have policies to deal with all of these. You need to have policies with the acquisition and disposition of land. If somebody makes an offer to purchase a piece of municipal land, you have to make sure that the disposition, that is how you dispose of it, policy is met. You need a specific policy that deals with the member of council, member of staff relationship, not a general council staff relationship policy, but how individual members of council and individual members of staff interact with each other on a policy basis or as a matter of policy. And that needs to be reflected and incorporated in the code of conduct for municipal councils. You must have an accountability and transparency policy. That is, the public must be able to look at this policy and determine, well, how does this municipality or this municipal council and municipal organization function in an accountable and transparent way in its services and its relationship to the public. Very, very important policy, often underrated. Oh, and wait a minute, there's even more. Mandatory codes of conduct have come into play in recent years. Every municipality must have a code of conduct. Every municipality must have an integrity commissioner who responds under that code of conduct, both to complaints and to opinions requested in writing by members and their responsibilities under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act. The Conflict of Interest Act opinions are a really good thing for a municipal council and municipal members, quite frankly, because previously you had to pay for them out of your own pocket. And that discouraged a lot of people from asking, I think, what were important questions. Because the integrity commissioner can now deal with that, the municipality has to pay. But I think that's not an unreasonable thing to do. But the integrity commissioner is not the only accountability officer that now exists. There's, as we said before, a closed meeting investigator. You may appoint one yourself. If you don't as a council, then the provincial ombudsman is the default integrity commissioner. You have an option of having a municipal ombudsman, but again, if you don't have your own, the provincial government has assigned that responsibility for complaints to be filed to the provincial ombudsman about how municipal actions are implemented. That's one of the best ways to put it. So there's a number of accountability officers that actually exist. So we don't have the provincial civil servants anymore, but who looked at some of these things and investigated some of these things. But we do have people who, quite frankly, have even more power than provincial staff ever did. So that's a bit of a summary, but I think what you can see from this partial list is that provincial oversight is still there because you're still, in the words of the judge, creatures of the province or creatures of provincial statute. But the provincial control is no longer by specific grants that said, if you spend this much money on this particular type of project that meets our standards, we will give you this percentage of your expenditure. That was the old conditional grant method. They used to have technical staff that oversaw that. That's the way they used to run it. You needed approval of the kind of bridge you were going to build in order to get a bridge grant. Now, you don't have that. However, you now have mandatory policies. You now have provincial legislation. You now have regulations. You now have things like minimum maintenance standard and that you must adopt. And these are all municipally funded and municipally implemented. And you have oversight by independent accountability officers. So has the world changed? Sure. Has the provincial control changed? Quite frankly, in the way it's delivered, but you have more room within to operate. However, your accountability is probably even greater. It is even greater as a municipal council as a result of that. So the world has changed, but it's placed a lot more responsibility on you. Municipal council meetings tend to be longer, tend to be more technical. You require more sophistication among your staff, and councillors need to take a different view of municipal operations than was done 20 years ago, quite frankly, as a result of all of this. So that's just a bit of an oversight. Fred, you want to add any comments to that before we jump to the next section?
No, I think it's really dramatic, the changes that we've seen in the last 10 to 15 years. It imposes huge responsibilities on councils. It's a much more technical world, and the personal liability, frankly, is increasing in a number of different areas. So yeah. You're right. It's a different environment. And yeah, it's social media to all that. It's a very different world.
Forgot about that. That's yeah. I mean, what do we see on the horizon? I think we're going to see some increased regulation of municipal planning processes, not because they need increased regulation, but the province they got a problem with housing. We have as a province in terms of not enough has been built in the last decade, and there will be some attempts to tweak municipal planning processes in order to be seen as doing something about it. We've seen the premier say building permits aren't getting issued fast enough. Well, it's quite frankly, its land isn't being brought to development fast enough, even by the owners in many cases. So it's not the building permits, that's kind of the end of the process. I think we're going to see more prescription for codes of conduct. We'll talk about that a little later. At least I know it's in the works. I know it's drafted. Whether or not it'll get tabled before the next election is another matter. As I said before, asset management planning is going to take a much bigger role in the years ahead. I suspect that you might see greater requirement for local action on contaminated sites. Environmental issues are not going to go away. In fact, I think that within the next term of council, people will be talking about mandatory climate change action plans at a municipal level. Even if they're rudimentary, there'll be a start. And unfortunately, when assessments are eventually updated, you're going to have to deal with, probably at the upper tier, but also locally, some complicated measures for controlling the tax shifts that take place. We saw that the last time they were updated after having been allowed to fall out of date. And we know that they're substantially out of date now, having missed having two deadlines deferred, quite frankly. And that municipalities have to figure the way out of that. So there's going to be pressure. There's going to be pressure on taxation. There's going to be pressure on debt. The impact will be not just on financial resources, but I think staff resources as well. There wasn't so long ago that someone might have been the clerk administrator or clerk treasurer administrator of the township of North Dorchester, for instance, or township of West Nicerie. We had people that wore multiple hats. It's no longer possible for professional managers within your municipal corporation to wear multiple hats, because there are times when one of those hats is front and center. And for instance, if you're clerk administrator, what happens during election time? What's the most important thing? Obviously, elections. So you have great difficulty doing the CAO function if you're in the heat of the election process. Same with the treasury process. Your professional managers are going to need professional qualifications, and you've made those kinds of moves. Congratulations for that. But you need to go further. Succession plans will be essential. How do you make sure that when people ultimately leave or move to a different job, they can be filled, those jobs can be filled with a minimum of stress to the organizations. But one thing you have to remember as you go ahead, that the senior management positions in your municipality and the statutory offices can't be training positions. They're not positions that somebody gets into and grows into anymore. They require a full suite of skills in the incumbents that are put in those positions from day one. So with all of that setting the stage, Fred, I'll turn it over to you to talk about roles and responsibilities. We have time for questions at the end of this session. If for some reason Fred or I say something that really catches your attention and you really want to deal with it right there, feel free to interrupt us. We'll give you an appropriate answer at the time. So Fred, over to you.
Thanks, Nigel. I think this may be a subject that is one of the most crucial ones in terms of dealing with your organization. And it's interesting because the province has set out the job description for members of council, for heads of council, and for your administration. And it's significant, I think, to keep that in mind. This isn't a responsibility that you take on that has unlimited scope to it. There are some borders around each of the positions that you hold, whether you're a staff member or a member of council or a head of council. Municipal government is regulated and legislated by over 100 provincial acts. Over 100 provincial acts. That says instantly that to members, it should be saying to members of council that the importance of your staff in terms of providing technical advice and advice in particular areas in relation to the requirements under the legislation. So I want to take you through some of the legislative responsibilities very quickly and just give you a sense of where they fall. And I thought I'd start with the role of council. And the first requirement, this is found in the Municipal Act, is that council represents the public. No surprise there. You have an obligation as a council to represent the public within your community. You won't see that when it comes to staff. Staff's responsibility is different. But council has that responsibility to represent the public. But the section goes on to say, to consider the well-being and interests of the municipality. And in this circumstance, municipality has two meanings. The first one is your geographical boundary, the geographical limits of your municipality. But the second meaning is the municipal corporation. So you have an obligation as member of council to act in the best interests of your community and in the best interests of the municipal corporation. And that's a significant one. I'm not going to take you through a story I've told fairly often about a member of council who in Sudbury decided to conduct himself in a way that was not in the best interests of the municipality and the outcome of that. It's an important section, I think, that lays the groundwork for almost everything that you're doing as a council. The second responsibility is to develop policies and programs. At the end of the day, council's job is to set policy and to make decisions. And that's your role. And you do that in a very open public way, as Nigel talked about some of the policies that are in place to affect that. So you develop the policies and programs, and when they're in place, you have an obligation as a council to evaluate them. Normally that happens during the budget process. The Act says council gets to determine which services the municipality provides. I think more appropriately put, you get to determine the levels of service that the municipality is going to provide. And you will do that through your budget process each year. There are two provisions that start with the words "to ensure," not to do, not to implement on your own, but to ensure that they're in place. And the first one is that there's administrative policies and practices in place. And secondly, controllership policies and practices in place. Why does council have to ensure that? To implement the decisions that you've made as a council. There's that overriding concept of being the decision maker as the decision-making body for the municipality. So council has to ensure that the administrative and controllership policies are in place to implement your decisions. The next item that you must ensure as a council is that your organization is accountable and transparent. Nigel mentioned that council has a policy. Every council in the province has a policy on accountability and transparency, how you are attempting to be accountable and how you're attempting to be transparent as an organization, and what those things mean. It's a significant aspect, a significant part of the role of council in determining that you are accountable and transparent. Council, the buck stops with council. You have an obligation to maintain the financial integrity of the municipality. Some think that that's the job of the treasurer. It's not. at the end of the day, the buck stops with council, and you have to maintain that financial integrity throughout the term. Other duties, province always adds a section on other duties as assigned. There are references in various statutes. Probably one of the best examples relates to the emergency plan and declaring emergencies, which are declared by the head of council, but at the end of the emergency, it is stopped by a decision of council. That's the list. That's the entire list. And it's important to note that you do not see anywhere on that list that there is any managerial function. None given to specific members of council, none given to the head of council. The powers of the municipality and the powers of council itself rest with the body as opposed to individual members. And we'll come to that in more detail in a moment. The next, legislative requirement I want to talk about is the head of council. And the head of council, the description in the Act applies to all heads of council, whether you are the mayor or the reeve or the warden. By the way, congratulations, Your Worship, on your appointment to that role, or the chair in a region. The powers for each of these offices fall under the heading of head of council, and they are all identical. So the powers of the warden, for example, at the county are identical to the powers of a mayor or a reeve at a lower tier. The first one has been in the Act for a long time, at least part of it. It used to say, preside over council meetings. And that's all it said for almost 100 years. But the Act was expanded and provides now so that meetings, business can be carried out efficiently and effectively. I think that imposes a higher standard on heads of council in terms of how they conduct meetings, how they deal with issues that come forward, being prepared for meetings, dealing with interruptions and distractions and disturbances, how they maintain decorum, presiding over council meetings so that the business can be carried out efficiently and effectively. It's a really important element. Every council meeting, in my experience over the years, has a personality. And that personality most closely resembles the personality of the chair, of the head of council. It's not the head of council's meeting, it's the council meeting, which is, I think, important to keep in mind throughout this process. Council is the legislative body, sets its own rules of procedure, and has a number of policies and requirements in terms of conduct of its members and other people who are attending the meeting. Head of council must provide leadership to council. Notice that phrase is really important. It doesn't say provide leadership to the municipal organization, it says to council. The Municipal Act creates, in my opinion, a really clear line between the obligations and responsibilities of council and council members and the obligation of administration, of staff. The Act requires that the head of council provide leadership to the council. And that's, I think, significant in terms of the way it's been worded. Representing the municipality in official functions is a significant one. Mayors I've worked with over the years took this very seriously. It's an important way of connecting with the community, and the community has the expectation that the head of council will be attending events and be participating, and we're going to see how that gets expanded out in just a few minutes. I talked about the municipal council having an obligation to ensure that the organization, the administrative policies and controllership policies were in place, as well as accountability and transparency policy was in place. The head of council has an obligation to provide advice to council on these matters. Clearly, the head of council isn't, in most instances, expert on these various areas, so we'll be looking for some help, and Nigel's going to talk about that in a few minutes. But there's an obligation. This part of this leadership role is that the head of council has an obligation to provide advice to council on these matters. Item E says that the head of council acts as the chief executive officer, the CEO. If you're from private business, you'll know that the CEO of the private corporation is the person who's responsible for the day-to-day activities of the organization. That's not the case in municipal government in Ontario. The head of council is the chief executive officer, but it has a very specific meaning. In fact, interestingly, back 2006, I guess, when the Municipal Act was being amended, there was a discussion around the province. Some people wanted to get rid of the term chief executive officer because it was confusing, and others wanted to keep it but define it. And I have to admit, Nigel and I were on opposite sides of this. He said, just get rid of it. And I said, no, let's keep it and define it. And the province ended up doing that. So there is now specific legislation what it means to be the chief executive officer. At the end of the day, though, I think Nigel's right. That this term has to, at some point in the not too distant future, disappear. And you'll see that all of the responsibilities as the CEO can really fit into the broad general definition and requirements of being the head of council. The reason I say it's different than private business, in the municipal corporation, what we have is a chief administrative officer who has the statutory duty to conduct the day-to-day business. So we'll come to that in a few minutes and talk about it in a little bit more detail. But that's the role of the head of council in terms of the scope. We still have to add to it the chief executive officer. Other duties, by the way, if there's an emergency in your municipality, the head of council will call it, will declare it. Never do it mayor would never do that on their own. There's a working group, an emergency working group, and that would be giving advice to the mayor on this throughout. But as I said before, it gets terminated at the end of the emergency by action by council. So there are other duties in various statutes. Nigel, why don't you talk about this issue of controllership that has an obligation of both the council and the head of council?
Okay, thanks, Fred. Well, the first thing, when I tried to define this some years ago, I got the dictionary out and I looked up and said, what's controllership? And the dictionary said, it's what controllers do. Well, that wasn't helpful at all. In fact, I remember when I was in high school, or elementary school, if I'd defined a word using the word itself, I would have failed, or I would have been marked incorrect. So I looked a little further, and I think I've come up with a determination that it's a number of different things. But in a municipal context, controllership includes, I think, 4 key things. One is a program of risk management. That is, how do we look after, the physical and financial assets of the organization? How do we look after the cash? How do we look after the physical assets? How do we keep ourselves limited in our exposure to liability? These are all elements of risk management. And in fact, during this term of council, you've probably heard from a representative of your municipal insurance company about risk management. My experience, they love to come and talk to council about limiting risks because you have a mutual interest in risk limitation. So that's one element. Risk from loss, risk from damage, risk from exposure to liability. That's one. The second one is that the municipality has to have suitable internal controls. And that's not just to prevent risk theft, but is to prevent inappropriate use of resources. So what are suitable internal controls? Well, your procurement bylaw. Who can buy what, at what level, and how is that discretion exercised? in accordance with the policy set by council. Your procurement bylaw is an internal control mechanism. How expenses, people are reimbursed for expenses. There's a process, you're familiar with it. That's a control, internal control. How payment is issued on an invoice. Does the person who receives the goods approve the invoice for payment and then actually physically prepare the check? I would hope not. I mean, basically, internal control says that nobody controls adjacent steps in a financial process. You don't shortcut it. There's multiple players. And in fact, Fred once told me that he conducted a session on how you buy a pencil in a municipality and all of the different controls that were involved in actually making a simple purchase in a municipality, whether it's a pencil or whether it's a grader. Same sort, or a multi-million-dollar bridge or recreation facility. There are internal controls in terms of the decisions and the acquisition and the payment for various elements of it. That's internal controls. Who pays attention to that on your behalf? Well, certainly your staff do, but also your external auditor does. One of the things your external auditor does in order to be able to issue his or her opinion on your financial statements as to whether or not they fairly represent the financial position of the municipality is that they have to test certain of the internal controls every year. They'll test not all of them every year, but they'll test different ones in different years in order to make sure that the system is working smoothly. And in fact, you should expect to see what's commonly referred to as a management recommendation letter every year from your external auditor that speaks to any weaknesses or areas where they recommend improvement in the internal control system. You usually get that around the same time or shortly before the audited financial statements are presented for your approval. In fact, your approval of the financial statements, believe it or not, is a control mechanism. You may just think it's rubber stamping, but it's much more than that. Periodic interim financial reporting. Those are the budget to actual statements that you receive periodically from your treasurer, usually from your treasurer, and they're probably quarterly. So here's what we plan to spend, or what's our budget. Here's how much we spent to date. The difference is what's called a variance. And the most important part of that comparison is this variance reasonable? And it may be reasonable based on time, or it may be unreasonable based on some unforeseen circumstance, but you need to have an understanding. And municipal expenditures, some of them take place regularly, like clockwork every month. Some of them are quite what we refer to in the finance field as lumpy. That is, they over a calendar year, they take place at different times. So, you know, if you're doing a report after the first quarter on snow clearing, you would not be surprised to find that winter control. Most of it takes place in January, February, and March. So you could actually spend half the year's budget in that period of time, and then not spend very much at all again until you got to the last quarter of the year. But the difference between what's budgeted, unless you calendarize your budgeted expenditures for comparison purposes, you end up with variances that are based on time, as well as variances that are based on units, or variances based on cost. And your treasurer should be reporting, and your CAO in terms, and your department heads, as to the rationale for the variances and whether they're reasonable or not.
Nigel,
Because if they're not reasonable, you have to make some adjustments. Yes.
just wondering, over the last 2 years, we've changed our budget process so that we're ahead of the calendar year. And then this past year, we changed it so we could do RFQs for major capital projects prior to budget approval. Would that be considered a process of controllership?
That's an excellent process, whether you consider it good controllership. Yeah, absolutely it is. I was going to speak to that. Thank you, Councillor. One of the things that I talked about, ancient history, 20 years ago, municipal councils didn't adopt their budgets until March, April. Heavens, they waited for the school boards to set their rates and the county to set their rates and the province to announce the grants before they set their budgets. And many municipalities weren't setting their budgets until June, and the year was half over. There's no need to wait any longer. What you're doing now in terms of adopting the budget before the year starts is best practice. It makes common sense. In terms of your processes that you're using for procurement for different larger items, RFQs, that might be appropriate. There are times when tender is more appropriate, where there's not much differentiation between goods or services, but RFQs are a valuable tool as well. And quite frankly, it doesn't necessarily commit you to the budget expenditure if your RFQ is clear in that regard. So that's, again, that is a very good practice as well. Congratulations for that. And it gives you the ability to, you haven't gone as far down the road before you make the decision. So good for you on that one. Is that, Councillor, does that address the issue you were asking about?
Thanks. Yeah, no, I think we've all been happy with how those processes have been unfolded. It's just good to have a name that encompasses the multiple steps we've taken.
Yeah, good.
Yeah, thanks.
The final thing I like to see as part of controllership is what I refer to as a statement of values and ethics regarding financial matters. Basically, it's a common understanding among staff and members of council that the money that you're and the assets and the resources that you have belong to the community, belong to the corporation, not to the individual. They're not, it's not council's money. It's not staff's money. It's not a department head's money. You, in effect, hold those resources in trust in order to provide service to the present and future residents, ratepayers, and visitors to the municipality and businesses as well. So it's a pretty broad field, quite frankly. It's not just about bookkeeping. It's not just about number crunching. There's a lot of value in the process. I'll touch a couple of other things very quickly and turn it back to Fred. But you talked about the chief executive officer, and Fred laid out for you that the act says that the head of council acts as the chief executive officer. Prior to the Municipal Act changes, it said the head of council is the chief executive officer. So when they changed it to act, the policy manager, I said, geez, you've actually, I'm disappointed that you've left it in. He says, oh yeah, but we defined it. We defined it, and we've defined it in a way that makes it clear that the person is not responsible for day-to-day operations. We've said this person upholds and promotes the purposes of the municipality. That means, and here's what I think that means, and here's what he had intended, is that a decision is made by council, the vote's close, passes by one vote. The mayor was on the losing side. Somebody sticks a microphone in front of the mayor and says, well, Madam Mayor, what do you think about that one? How do you feel? You lost. Okay, you were a proponent of whatever it was, but it didn't go your way. As head of council, the mayor has an obligation to say, listen, this is a council where majority rules. It's a democratic process. We had some good information. We had some good debate. A decision was made, and we're going to abide by council's decision. I'm going to support council's decision. We've got a lot of other important things to do. End of discussion is basically what hold and promote the purposes of the municipality. An individual member of council doesn't have that same responsibility. Individual member of council can say, geez, I lost. If it ever comes back up again, you know which way I'm going to go. In fact, I'm going to see if I can bring it back and how it might come forward again. I'll be talking to the clerk about what the rules are for reconsideration, when and how we can do it. That may not be, well, it may or may not be politically smart, but nevertheless, the head of council's got an obligation under law to do better than that and to actually support the decision of council, whether or not he or she voted for it in the first place. Second thing is CEO. is the person is responsible for promoting public involvement. They got an obligation. Madam Mayor, you get invited in normal times anyway. You get invited to speak and attend a lot of events and say a few words, bring greetings, as it's often called. And that's an opportunity to congratulate people for being involved in their community and to encourage greater action in the community and community affairs. It's a wonderful opportunity, and heads of council do this regularly. Act as a representative of the municipality locally, nationally, and internationally. Well, new mayors go, does that mean I can head off to Thailand to drum up business for the municipality? Well, the answer is only if council approves the budget for you to do that. But excuse me, there are lots of opportunities where the head of council is expected to be a spokesperson, to not necessarily be a negotiator, but be seen as a champion of the municipality in negotiations with organizations or corporations that want to move to the municipality. You also get to share the stage with MPs and MPPs different times. It's an opportunity to promote issues that are important to your municipality. When the head of council leads a delegation at a conference, you are acting as a representative of a municipality. That's not just locally, it's provincially as well. International is somewhat rare, but I do recall when I was treasurer of the City of London, and the company that is the parent company of Dr. Oker, you know, the pizza company that you often see as you're driving in and out of London from your township or your municipality. The last thing that was done in terms of the formal signing of the deal was that the mayor was flown to Germany to meet the board of directors along with the chairman of the London Economic Development Corporation in order to formally bring the support of the municipal council to the deal. She wasn't there as a negotiator, but she was there as a representative in order to show that support. It doesn't happen often, but it can happen. And finally, foster activities that enhance social and environmental well-being of the municipality. Might be talking to school kids with local government week. It might be in terms of taking part in a climate change panel. There's any number of those things. And Madam Mayor, you're going to be doing this both as warden and as head of council for Thames Centre this year. I would expect that you're going to find that you've got some need to share some of these responsibilities with other members of council. Interestingly, and I'll come to that sharing in a second, these particular pieces were written into legislation and drafted by a former CAO of the former township of North Dorchester when he was working with the provincial government in municipal affairs before he passed away. He's quite involved in the revamping of the Municipal Act, and his experience working for what was then North Dorchester brought a significant, what should we say, hands-on and realistic interpretation to many of the changes that were made in that sweeping change to the Municipal Act. So if you have to share some of your duties, it's quite common for a municipality to have a deputy head of council. That position can either have been created by the restructuring order that put the municipality together, can be a municipal bylaw, which might be at the local level or that set up the county and the county restructuring order, or it could be incorporated by both. But that deputy head of council has only those powers as provided for in the order or provided for by the bylaw. There's no independent powers unless acting under that authority. And at the local council, that's usually only in the absence of the mayor or the head of council. So that deputy doesn't, some places there, somebody said, well, I'm deputy head of council. I've got more authority than my other councilors. Well, the answer is no. The only sometimes and in specific circumstances. But again, it's important to be able to share some of the head's responsibility, particularly in circumstances like you find yourself now, and even with other members of council as well, in terms of some of those social functions and representative functions. So you got a role of the head and the role of the members. They're quite different. But one of the things common is you have limited individual powers. You've got lots of responsibility, but not a lot of individual powers. Collectively, you've got all the power. It's a public role. You're 24/7. You're not paid 24/7, but you're seen as being available or exposed 24/7. But you have to remember you're neither administrators nor managers. There's some very specific responsibilities given for administration in the legislation, and Fred's going to cover those.
Thanks, Nigel. In 2001, the Municipal Act was rewritten in its entirety for the first time in 150 years. And it was a large statute, big book. And I started to read it. I got into it just to section 5. And I read section 5, and it was brand new. And it's very short. And I read it maybe 10 times because I wanted to get a sense of what it said. But it is so fundamental, in my opinion, in terms of the structure of local government. And here's what it says: that the powers of a municipality shall be exercised by council and shall be exercised by bylaw of council. So what does that mean? Well, if it's exercised by bylaw, powers must be exercised at a public meeting. You can't pass bylaws at a closed meeting of council. So that's the transparency part. The powers shall be exercised, that's mandatory. And it doesn't apply, it doesn't say council shall be exercised by individual members of council or by staff. It says it shall be exercised by council. So you have to be able to trace back the exercise of power and the fact when either members of council or committees of council or staff receive powers, they do so because they have been given that authority by bylaw of council. It's really fundamental, but it really sets the tone and creates the relationship, in my opinion, for how municipal government operates in Ontario. So it's section 5 of the Municipal Act, and it really says council is the body that exercises the power. Fundamental to do. As with the elected side, the council side, there is now an administrative side. And it starts by saying that administration has the responsibility to undertake research and provide advice to council. Well, what is that? Well, those are the reports that you receive from your staff. And those reports should be in writing, and they should include a recommendation. So staff undertakes the research and provides advice. Council has an obligation to receive that advice from staff. Province is looking to ensure that council is receiving appropriate advice on matters from the staff. So it's a fundamental, this undertaking research and providing advice. Once a decision is made by council, staff have an obligation to implement it, whether it was the recommended course of action by staff or not. Staff have an obligation to implement council's decisions, and that's appropriate. But it starts with this undertaking research and providing advice from staff to council, council making a decision, and then staff implementing those decisions. For every department in your organization, there are administrative practices and procedures. There are policies in place. And these are internal to your staff. These aren't policies that get approved or required to be approved by council. They are the day-to-day how your departments run, how they function. And every department has them. They have the policies and the procedure manuals in terms of how they undertake the business that they have to do. So I think the line is really clear between the council side and the administrative side in terms of how the province sees local government in Ontario. There's a provision in the Act dealing with the Chief Administrative Officer, CAO. And you'll see that it's optional in the legislation for a council to appoint a CAO. By the way, the appointing of that CAO is an exercise of power by the council. So council appoints a CAO by bylaw, and once that is done, that person has the responsibilities under the Act to exercise general control and management. That's the business equivalent of the chief executive officer. So in the municipal context, it's the CAO. Exercise general control and management. It doesn't matter what the title this person has, whether it's CAO or town manager or city manager. In Sudbury at one point, we had a chief commissioner. The important part is that the bylaw appointing contains the provisions in Article A for exercising general control and management. What does that mean? Well, at the end of the day, that means that that person is responsible for the administrative side and becomes the primary source of advice to council, and council members should be looking to that member for advice. It's important, I think, for members of council to understand that the advice they receive or the information they get from staff should be coming through the CAO or should be coming through a department head. For example, in Sudbury, we had a list of people that members of council, a list of staff members that members of council could speak to. And it was restricted to that group of people. So I was on that list as city solicitor. But one of the things we made clear in Sudbury is if a council member came and spoke to me, by the end of the day, the CAO was aware of the conversation. It was important to do. So council members need to be focusing their attention on the people that are authorized within the organization to be working with staff. And I'll have some comments on that a little bit later as well. So it says optional. I started there. Virtually all municipalities in the province have chief administrative officer or the equivalent. Very few do not. And in my experience, it creates incredible difficulties if you do not have this one focused person that has the overall general control and management of the staff. There are other people in your organization called statutory officers, and these are unique in the sense that they are appointed by bylaw of council. And once that appointment is made, they then have two job descriptions. They have the job description given to them by the municipality, but more significantly, they have the job description given to them by the province. And that can either be by way of a statute, thus the title statutory officer, or a regulation under a statute. So for example, the chief building official has responsibilities relating to the building code. The clerk is getting busy pretty soon in relation to election responsibilities, treasurer, fire chief. These are all statutory officers, and they have requirements placed upon them by the province. The key is this: the council cannot interfere with the exercise of the statutory powers and responsibilities given to these people by the province. Once they're appointed by bylaw, they have that responsibility to continue. Nigel talked about a number of changes, and one of them he mentioned was this new policy, relatively new policy in the last couple of years. Council staff relationships are a really important factor. And in my experience, people watch how staff treat council and how council members treat staff as well. It sets the tone for your community. The province decided that it was important to have a policy put in place that deals with the relationship not between council and staff, but between individual members of council and the officers and employees of the municipality. This policy that's now must be in place in every municipality has to be dealt with in your code of conduct. Therefore, it's clear that it's an individual responsibility for members of council in terms of their role with staff. In my experience, the fundamental and the thing that makes for a really outstanding organization is a demonstration of respect for the various roles, because the role of staff and the role of individual members of council are very different. That fundamental basis, in my experience, if you have that in place, will make a huge difference in terms of understanding the statutory roles and responsibilities, but in terms of making for council to allow council to make good decisions and effective decisions. Next slide says it all. Roles of members of council and staff are different. In fact, we should maybe, Nigel, change that, saying the roles of members of council and the role of head of council and staff are different. They each bring different responsibilities to the table. They're set out in the legislation, and it's important not only to understand what your responsibilities are, but with the responsibilities of other people within the organization itself.
Fred?
Yes.
I just want to clarify. So I think when we talked about policies and some of the tools available for council, is it fair to say that compliance with those policies is entirely up to the CAO? That's the main mechanism for compliance.
The responsibility, council should expect that the CAO has in place the various policies and procedures for your administration to function. If there are policies that council is required to have, for example, accountability and transparency purchasing, it's incumbent upon council to ensure that those policies are current and that they are effective within your organization. So you need to look to the CAO to give you advice in terms of the appropriateness of it. And you need to say to the CAO, are these being implemented in an appropriate way at the administrative level? Sure.
Okay, so maybe there's a duty of care on council, but the effectiveness and reporting on that is largely the responsibility of the CAO.
Yep.
Not that we have a problem. I'm just clarifying that because I know we have, there's a lot of different things there, and so it can get challenging where we have responsibility, but yeah, there is a clear mechanism for that implementation. And
yes, absolutely. Okay.
CAO's job is quite complex. He or she must understand, for instance, what the statutory responsibilities of statutory officers are, because he or she is responsible for performing their performance evaluation. So not only does he or she have to review how well they perform on the local issues, they have to understand how well they're performing on the provincial responsibilities. And that's what gets reported to council, whether or not there's an appropriate process in place. Does that help?
We have the duty to care, but we also have a defined need to know.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Absolutely. Yeah.
That about 8 years ago now, maybe 9, the province amended the Safe Drinking Water Act and imposed personal liability on members of council, on decision makers, senior staff and members of council. And it was important for every member of council to understand what that meant in terms of their duty of care and the responsibilities because suddenly it wasn't just a corporate act. It became, if the actions were inappropriate and the members of council weren't acting based on the duty of care that's required, there was some responsibility. So you're right. You need to be asking those questions to ensure that you're in the best place that you should be. Okay, we want to just make some observations of various things that we think are important. And the first one we wanted to talk about was members of council who end up or believing that they are the complaints department for the municipality. This is a huge issue, and it's an important issue for you as council members to understand vis-a-vis your staff as well. We had a council member in Sudbury, I have to tell you, who had the nickname Don Quixote with a pickup truck. And he got the phone call, and he was out looking at the situation before staff were involved or anyone else was involved. And frankly caused more difficulties for the municipality and for the people that he was going to visit sometimes. How you deal with requests for service or complaints, if you will, how they're dealt with by your municipality has changed over the years, and the level of sophistication that we're seeing now is a much different one than it was 20 years ago or more. Running out to see what the problem is a really inefficient way to do it. Nigel, you wanted to talk about this in terms of the type of system, the work order system that some places have in place, and the benefits that brings to it.
Yeah, municipalities have different ways of dealing with this, and probably the best way to do it is to have a single point of intake for most requests for service. It can be done through website, it can be done electronically, it can be done through an intake person, that's such as the person who answers the phone. In fact, the person who deals with the most municipal requests for service and solves the most issues for members of the public in a medium-sized municipality is the person who answers the phone. The receptionist probably deals with more requests for service or helps people with more issues than anybody else. You should ask them to log it. You'd be surprised. For members of council to take the call in the first place is often an inefficient process. And in fact, one of the best techniques I ever saw was from a former public works director of your municipality, who said, well, here's what I do. He said, every councillor, when first elected, gets a business card with key numbers on the back of it. Do you still do that in your municipality? The names and the numbers of the key people to call for certain services, whether it be the drainage superintendent or the public works manager. And if somebody stops a member of council with an issue at the supermarket and says, what do I do about so-and-so? You hand them the card and say, see this person on the back? That's the person to get in touch with. They're the ones that can address your issue. If you don't get good service from this person, then give me a call back. And 95% of the time, you'd never hear from the person again. It's great. That's the person you talk to. And in fact, have you ever gone online or tried to deal with Bell or Rogers or somebody like that? The most difficult thing is to get to the person who can solve your problem. Where are they? Who are they? Is to get your issue to that person. The other advantage of having a systematic approach to work orders or dealing with requests for service, I'll apologize for that phone, is to be able to log them, measure them, and consider performance so that the CAO at least knows whether or not various departments and systems are working. To get a council member to try and manage individual complaints is really an inefficient use of your time. And in fact, if you get drawn into this, you'll often find that when you get invited out to look at the culvert going into somebody's laneway on municipal property, and they will tell you just enough information that that they need to convince you to do something on their behalf. They won't tell you everything. In fact, you should always start and say, well, have you had somebody from Public Works come out to take a look at it yet? Because they can help you better than I can. And often you'll hear, well, yeah, but I didn't like their answer. So that's another matter. But usually they're trying to get something that they couldn't get otherwise. You need to have your radar out on that one. But it's not unusual now for smaller municipalities to have an effective system in place. And it can be quite useful and quite beneficial from a management improvement point of view as well. So the question is, do you get into the weeds? And bylaw enforcement is one where people like to draw you in because sometimes things don't look black and white, but that's why bylaw enforcement officers are trained in terms of legal process and legal precedent. The courts have been fairly critical of elected officials who get involved in bylaw enforcement matters as individuals. And in fact, you can get into some messy spots with that. Better off to leave it to the professionals and get reports to council, quite frankly. It's not your job to approve individual building permits, but it is your job to make sure that the building permitting process is working in accordance with your policy and in accordance with legislation. And you do that in conjunction with your CAO, as opposed to talking to your CBO about individual permits.
Nigel,
Jump ahead. Go ahead, Fred.
before you get to that.
Yep.
One of the other reasons you need to be cautious jumping into a situation is that often it's not a municipal responsibility that you're dealing with. It could be an upper tier responsibility. It could be a county responsibility. It could be a provincial potential responsibility, or it could be between neighbors. If you find yourself getting into these where you shouldn't be, you may be, we talked about duty of care, you may be putting onto the municipality a responsibility that wasn't there initially. So you need to do that assessment in every situation. And Nigel's right. People don't tell you the whole story. They tell you the side of the story that to convince you of what you're getting to. The other important fact, I think, is I talked about Section 5 and the fact that council makes a decision. That means you get to create laws. What an incredible power. You can pass bylaws to create laws for all sorts of things, planning and traffic and a myriad of different things. That responsibility rests with you to be the decision maker. The responsibility, once you've done that as a council, the responsibility to enforce it falls to your staff. And I think that's an important distinction to keep in mind, that you put the laws in place. You said these are the requirements, these are the penalties, and your staff are there. The people are trained to do it, are there to deal with the bylaw enforcement issues. Be very cautious getting into this. You can, in my experience, council members can find themselves in some difficulty fairly quickly on this matter. Nigel, you're going to start into the next slide.
Yep. I'm going to talk about decorum. Usually the only place you'll see decorum mentioned is in government procedures or in a municipal procedure bylaw. So what's it really mean, maintaining decorum? It means, in the context of your council, having to do with orderliness and the conventions of polite behavior. That's the definition: orderliness and the conventions of polite behavior. There has to be a way to deal with important issues with some sort of predictability in terms of process and with some sort of appropriate behavior. Beyond this, the mayor or chair of a meeting, could be a local board chair, has a statutory duty to maintain decorum in a meeting. Remember Fred said that they chair the meeting so that business can be carried out efficiently and effectively? Well, that means enforcing decorum. And decorum is set out by your procedure bylaw and policies. Now, what do you do if person does not respond appropriately to a decision of the chair, or the chair, in fact, lets inappropriate behavior, disorderly behavior or impolite behavior, just lets it go. Well, first of all, let's assume the head of council in the chair can actually deals with it. They can actually rule, Councillor so-and-so, that behavior or that comment is out of order. It does not conform to the requirements of decorum in our procedure bylaw, in my interpretation. And I ask that you withdraw it, or I ask that you be seated, or whatever appropriate thing. If the head of council just lets it go, that doesn't mean it can't be dealt with. Any member of council can also raise a point of order. Madam Mayor, Councillor X breached the procedure bylaw when he said so-and-so about the CAO. That was an inappropriate comment in terms of criticism, and I would ask that you ask him to withdraw that remark and to refrain from such future remarks. Head of council's got two choices to make at that point. Head of council can say, yeah, I agree with you, I missed that. Councillor so-and-so, would you please withdraw your remark and apologize? Or conversely, the head of council might say, no, I don't think he crossed the line on that issue. I'm going to let it go this time. What can happen then? Well, any member of council at that point can appeal the ruling of the chair. And they do that by standing and say, I appeal the ruling of the chair. That appeal in most bylaws goes immediately to council for a vote. And it goes to council for a vote with the motion being, shall the ruling of the chair be upheld? And council either votes in favor or they vote opposed. And the ruling that is subsequent to the vote is the actual ruling. So the chair can be overruled in that process. So quite frankly, if anybody does not behave well in a council meeting, whether it's an elected member or it's a member of the public in the audience who's not behaving appropriately, the head of council has the primary responsibility. Any other member of council has a secondary responsibility, and council as a whole, if called upon, can make a final ruling. So what's appropriate behavior? Let's talk about some of the inappropriate behavior that might not meet these conventions. Well, we'll start by looking at what's inappropriate. Excuse me. And I think this term gets thrown around a lot, and it's used sometimes when it's simply harassment, but bullying is a pretty serious allegation. See, it's the use of force, coercion, threat in order to abuse, aggressively dominate, or intimidate a person. So a person has to actually feel, quite frankly, frightened. The behavior is often repeated and habitual. Bullies tend to bully others on an ongoing basis, but it's a subcategory of aggressive behavior. And there's three sort of key criteria. There's got to be hostile intent. There's an imbalance of power and repetition over a period of time. Now, clearly, you can have a single act that would be bullying, but usually it's a repeated event where there's hostile intent, imbalance of power, and repetition over a period of time. It may or may not be specifically referenced in your workplace harassment and violence prevention policy that you adopted under the Occupational Health and Safety Act and that you review every year. Bullying clearly meets and exceeds the definition of harassment. So you need to be cautious about using the term bullying, but it's a very, very serious a matter. It's more likely to occur in a staff-to-staff position. It's where we're most likely to see it in an organization. But members of council left unchecked can fall into the practice of bullying. So what's this harassment? Well, it's pretty clear, and the definition's in law. It's in the Occupational Health and Safety Act. It'll be repeated in your policy as engaging in a course of vexatious comment or conduct against a worker in a workplace that's known or ought reasonably to be known to be unwelcome. The definition of workplace harassment includes workplace sexual harassment. So what's that mean? What's vexatious comment? Well, in its simplest form, I often use the example that Fred and I, if we were working in the same office and I came in every day and said, "My God, Fred, that's an ugly necktie. Where did you get it?" And I said that every day, and Fred just rolled his eyes and didn't say anything. Is that harassment? Well, I'm just behaving badly. I'm being a bit of a jerk. But the minute Fred says to me, I don't like that comment. I don't think it's funny, and I don't want you to make it anymore. Then right then, if I do it again, that's harassment. I then know, even though I thought I was being funny and I didn't know Fred was offended, and I had no way of knowing, but even though you might think it's inappropriate behavior and I should have known, but generally speaking, that would be harassment. That's simple form, that minor insult repeated, and you know it to be or should know it to be unwelcome. That's a minimum of harassment. There's a lot more that goes on in terms of behavior, includes workplace sexual harassment. Oh, by the way, what else is the workplace? Well, anywhere where work is done. You can actually harass a worker on the internet, because quite frankly, you now do work on the internet. Can you harass a worker at a conference? Yes, you can. One worker can harass another one. Because why are you at the conference? Because you're there to do municipal business. It's a workplace. People need to be very, very careful about unwanted comment, unwanted behavior, unwanted commentary to others about them. It's a difficult thing. It's not necessarily a difficult thing to prove. And you'll find that investigation is done by independent investigators. And there's a lot of jurisprudence to draw from in this. More commonly, and this starts to get into the decorum side of it. I mean, clearly bullying and harassment are inappropriate decorum. Here's what we're more likely to see. Workplace incivility. In fact, we see this in council meetings sometimes. It's been defined as low-intensity deviant behavior with ambiguous intent to harm the target. Well, let's unpack that. Low intensity. No, that means it's, gee, did he really say that? The person didn't yell, the person didn't shout, they didn't raise their fist, none of that. It was a comment that may be sarcastic. You're not sure what the intent was. Deviant behavior means it's not normal, but it could be just off the bubble. Ambiguous intent to harm the target. Did he really intend to insult Fred when he said that? You're better off to look at them and say, the ones that are characteristically rude and discourteous and display a lack of regard for others, those are uncivil behaviors. They certainly don't meet the standard for decorum in most people's opinion. Sarcastic remarks, eye rolling. I don't know if you've ever seen anybody in a meeting who, when somebody made a comment that they didn't agree with, they just lean back and they roll their eyes, or they toss their pen or something like that. That's inappropriate behavior in a public or private session, quite frankly. Rude put downs, or here's one that's you're more likely to hear: accusations about professional competence. Gosh, Madam Chair, I've read the report that the CAO provided to us, and I would have expected more from somebody with his qualifications. That's quite inappropriate. That's a rude put down or accusations about professional competence. you have to remember that the appropriate place to reprimand is in private. You praise in public, you criticize in private. Otherwise, you fall quite clearly into this category of inappropriate decorum, and workplace incivility is probably the best way. And one of the things that often goes, because people say, well, that's just Fred. Everybody knows what Fred's like. That's inappropriate in today's society, and it only leads to worse behavior on the part of the person that's not behaving well. So how do you deal with inappropriate behavior? Well, if it were staff and it was done at a staff meeting, you could bet that the CAO would call the person on it or draw them into their office right afterwards. But that's uncivil behavior. But if there's a complaint dealing with that's formalized under your workplace harassment and violence prevention policy, the investigation will either be done by management, that is the first level, and it'll be in your policy how it's done, or through an independent investigator, someone engaged from outside, or in some cases directly by the Ministry of Labor. If I, as an employee, am unhappy with how a harassment complaint has been investigated or not being investigated, or I think it won't be done appropriately, I can go directly to the Ministry of Labor, and the Ministry of Labor will assign an investigator. If they're violent incidents, normal practice is to involve police, and usually includes automatic suspension of both parties involved. There are instances where issues like this aren't dealt with appropriately. I've seen them across the province, and they escalate rather than go away if they're not dealt with. With elected officials, I mean, for staff to behave inappropriately, termination is always an option. For elected officials, it's not that clear. If it's behavior that breaches the code of conduct, then the Municipal Integrity Commissioner will obviously become involved if a complaint is filed with him or her. The Ministry of Labor might be involved if it's under the Workplace Harassment and Violence Prevention Policy, or it might be the police authority if it's a actual violence matter, or you could have all three at the same time, believe it or not. Usually the Integrity Commissioner will stop investigating if the police are involved. Management never investigates elected officials' behavior. It's just never. The province is currently conducting consultation. In fact, they've completed the consultation into strengthening codes of conduct, because there have been numerous instances in the last 3 years where either the province or councils or members of the public have reached a conclusion that the codes or the authority under the codes or the processes under the codes are not strong enough. So you may, as a council, have commented to Minister Dunlop when she was conducting the consultations to report to Minister Clerk. Those consultations are complete, and a report was provided. Staff drafted amendments to the Act and matters dealing with codes of conduct, and it's awaiting action by, I gather, the government. I think what you're likely to see, this is what I would expect, is that you'll end up with codes of conduct that are more comprehensive than our current codes that really cover only 4 items. But you'll see something like this, and this is an international company that does business in the US and Canada. And it's really broad. It says engaging in any direct behavior that's offensive, intimidating, malicious, insulting, et cetera, includes human rights matters, and inappropriate behaviors. Is quite comprehensive. But it's not just direct. They also say any indirect behavior, which could be construed as sexual offensiveness or harassment or bullying or explicit jokes, insults, displaying, emailing, texting, etc., including spreading malicious or insulting rumors. That's what the corporate world has in place for their employees and contractors and suppliers. That's what they think is important to their reputation. I would not be surprised if we ended up with something like this in municipal codes of conduct. So it's an interesting thing. I'll say a little more about that as we get closer to the end of this session. One integrity commissioner said, he says, you have to be sensitive as an elected official to the possibility that your words and actions will be perceived as unwelcome. Bob Williams is a very gentle man. This was a very blunt thing. You have to be sensitive that your remarks will be unwelcome. Your behavior will be unwelcome. Doesn't mean you shouldn't engage in lively discussion at council between members, but that discussion should be on the issue, not about the parties. That discussion should not involve your colleagues. It should involve the matter before council. And you need to be particularly careful where there's a power imbalance. Two members of council can have a debate on the council floor. Don't expect a member of staff to vigorously argue his or her recommendation the same way another colleague on council would. There's a clear power imbalance. Their job is to provide advice to council, not to debate with council. Need to be careful to understand that. And those kinds of words matter, both public and in private, because there is a power imbalance between elected and appointed officials has long been a serious issue, and it's always an issue. Fred, you'll often say that regardless of what the protocols are, anytime a member of council asks a member of staff for information or for an action, you can be sure that they'll pay more attention to it than they would if it were just another member of the public, even though it's council that directs staff. Right,
That's
Fred?
right. I think it's really important. Staff will never tell council members this, but the reality is staff will respond to you first. And frankly, that reprioritizes their workload. So if members of council are going to staff and asking for things to be done, be really cautious. That's not your role. You should be going through the CAO if you have a request for information, but you're reprioritizing the workload of your staff. And people are busy. Everybody I talk to, every municipality, people are really, really busy right now. And if there is this reprioritization going on a regular basis, it makes the staff role very, very difficult. And this power imbalance, as it says, is a real thing. And if it gets out of whack, frankly, in my experience, the community it loses on it. That people aren't being able to do the job that they were put in place to do. So words do matter, and how people perceive that. Maybe we can go on. We put a few slides in about prevention. The first one we're talking about is the head of council. Nigel and I've had the experience or the opportunity this year to work with several heads of council, and just in terms of their role and in terms of some of the issues that are significant and important. One of the things that I think is really important is that the head of council needs to focus time on being a chair. So you need to understand the procedure bylaw. You need to read it from time to time, just so you understand what the primary responsibilities and processes are within the bylaw itself. But you need to be familiar too with the codes of conduct, and you, as a head of council, need to ask the question: what are some of the techniques to conduct an efficient and effective meeting of council, or a committee of council for that matter? The role sitting in the chair of the mayor is a very different place to sit in a council chamber than other members of council. And it requires, I think, considerable work and considerable ongoing work to keep up to date with procedure bylaw. Expect your clerk will give advice and provide advice to council, not rulings. Clerks never give rulings, but heads of council should be the person in the room who has the second best knowledge of your procedure bylaw. Certainly, it's important. And council members should take a look at your procedure bylaw from time to time. It is what makes everything happen. Your council, if it's going to be effective, has to have a procedure bylaw that's really effective and that allows it to happen. It's a significant document. The next prevention talks about the service request system. I don't have anything more to add on this. Nigel, do you want to add any final comments?
I think we've dealt with that in the interest of time, Fred. We're cutting into questions. Yeah.
The next one is education and training. Everybody's paying attention to that now, and education and training starts for the election before May 2nd. May 2nd is the date that you can file for nomination. There are opportunities to do some training with people who are thinking of running for council, and that's important to do. But staff need to be thinking about the training program for not only new members of council, but the new council. That's everybody, people who are returning, people who are there for the first time. It is a much more complex and technical place to be than it was just a few years ago. And in fact, council training should be set out and laid out by your organization for virtually the entire term. Staff need to be giving some thought. Council needs to be funding training appropriately, not only for yourselves, but for your organization, for your staff as well. You need to be getting good advice from your staff. That requires training in their technical areas and skills development generally. But council members need the training as well for around meetings. Nigel and I have had so much fun over the years talking to councils about how to be effective at meetings, but there's other training like Safe Drinking Water Act, a whole series of different types of training that will enhance your ability to make effective decisions. The next prevention is, and this goes to the meetings issue to some extent, and I refer to these as ambushes. I'm of the view that when the council calls a meeting, when a meeting of council is scheduled, that when people walk into the room, that they should know what decisions council is being asked to make. And you do that by posting your agenda on the website, by telling the world, here's what we're going to deal with as a council this coming meeting. You need to be careful of things that change that order of business or that the types of decisions you're being asked to make. It can be coming out of a ratepayer or a citizen who tries to change the topic. It can come from staff who are putting on an addendum and asking council to make a last minute decision. Those are both ambushes. But so are ambushes are also from members themselves who say, you know, we've got to deal with this tonight. This is an urgent matter. We've got to deal with it. And yet several members of council aren't aware it's coming. The staff aren't aware it's coming. Deal with the agenda that you have published. You've told the public this is what you're doing. Respect that. Do it. It makes, in my experience, a much more effective council, and it ups the level of trust among council members and amongst staff and council. It's really important to watch out for the ambush, in my experience. Nigel, the last prevention, maybe you want to talk about this.
Every municipality today needs to be aware of what's happening in social media. We have less capacity in written media, in broadcast media, and we have more what I refer to in some cases as citizen journalists, or in some cases just people who enjoy stirring the pot on social media. Your council decision, I think now you have an obligation to make sure that your council decisions are communicated to the public by you in an objective manner, rather than having them relayed to the public by somebody who's not happy with the decision. Facebook, every community has a Facebook page. Since we're in public session, I won't give them my favorite name, but it's generally an opportunity for people to air grievances or to stir the pot. You want to make sure that a decision made by council is publicly described and publicly described appropriately in right after the decision's made. Most municipalities today have somebody whose job is to be a communications officer, and that should be their number one responsibility rather than number 4 on their job description. The work that you're doing, the decisions made by council, the service changes that are required because of emergencies, they're all really important. And it's important that the message get out there in an objective, factual manner. The 2022 election will be fought on social media to a degree that we've never seen before. And the corporate council and the corporate administration does not need to get tied up in that. That's an individual matter, but it's important to establish where council's public presence and social media presence is well in advance of the campaigning starting. I think that's going to be really critical. We're a few minutes away from the 2 hours. We've got all the time you'd like for questions. Apologize for taking a little longer than we thought. Over to you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you very much. And again, it's always an informative session with both you and Fred. So I appreciate the care that you take through the presentation. And it's always good. I know that we've taken these training courses before, the members of council that are here today, but it is valuable to refresh them every time, because there always is, just like when you read over your code of conduct, there is always something that you miss out on. So it's great to do that. Now, council, I'm going to open it up if you have any questions. Tom, go ahead.
Thanks, Your Worship. My question is largely to do with how do these expectations roll back to our residents and to our citizens? Because I think that you've mentioned there's a lot of rapid changes in the environment and some forthcoming regulatory changes, but I'm just wondering. I think we always try to make policy that makes sense to our residents and is intuitive. And I'm just wondering if you have any advice as to how we can be good community leaders and also advocate for the changing role of citizenship.
I'll jump in first. I think Fred made reference earlier to transparency, and I think that that's key to accountability and key to gaining the respect of the public, making sure that the material that council is going to debate is available to the public beforehand, so that if they choose to appear as a delegation, they can do that. The practice that some municipalities have of allowing anybody to come into a council meeting and function as a town hall meeting on any issue that happens to be on the agenda a particular day, I don't think serves the ratepayers generally very well. It tends to serve the people who may have a grievance to air, and it's never the appropriate place to resolve a grievance like that. But I think some transparency, some pre-publication of matters to be discussed by council, some formality. If you have to err on the side of formality rather than the side of informality, because it's really important business that you're dealing with. Fred, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I think it's important to hear from your ratepayers, and it's
Yes.
how you do that that becomes significant.
Yep.
I'm of the belief that you don't have to be doing that at the meeting itself.
Right.
You can have the defined delegation process to hear from the
Yep.
public and to hear, but to allow people to come in and make comments on issues that aren't part of your agenda. You get to set the agenda. It's your meeting. It's a council meeting, and you have responsibilities in terms of decisions that you have to make. But you have to hear from the public, and you have to tell the public how they can get in touch with you, the ways they can talk to council, bring their issues forward. It used to be at the grocery store and the gas station and church, and that's kind of expanded over the years, hasn't it, to a very different level. But they need to feel comfortable doing it. You may want to do something like a town hall meeting once a year, or twice a year, where you invite the public to come in. Council simply listens. You're there to listen, to hear, give people 3 minutes, 5 minutes, whatever, and just let them make their position known so that you get a sense from them. Again, Nigel's right. It's this whole issue of transparency. What you want to avoid is the ambush where your meeting is getting off the rails because somebody came up and did something that none of you were expecting, or most of you weren't expecting. It's always a delicate balance. If there are new things coming in, I think you should have an expectation on staff that staff lays that out in a report and say, this is new stuff. You need to hear about this. And staff are educating you as members of council, but they're also educating the public as well. When staff writes reports, they're not just writing for you. I think they have to be writing for the public at large as well to explain things. Be transparent. Nigel's right.
There's nothing wrong with members of the public phoning you as a member of council to express their thoughts on an issue. That's quite appropriate. That's how you function. It's a part of your representative role. It's how you exercise your representative role or gain information. That's fine. That's fine. It's but council meeting is not a debate between members of council and individual members of the public that happen to show up at that date.
Sorry.
All right. Any other questions? Nope, seeing none. Then you know what? I'm going to thank you both for joining us today. And I hope sincerely the next time I see you, it's going to be in person.
That'd be great. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So here's hoping. And again, Happy New Year. And thanks, gentlemen, for joining us today.
Okay.
Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you very much.
Okay, and moving on to the consent agenda. There are the minutes, so 6.1 and 6.2 that need to be received as, approved as circulated. So looking for a mover for the minutes. Councillor Heeman, seconded by Deputy Mayor Elliott. All in favor? Thank you. And then moving on to the consent agenda items 6.3 to 6.5 to be received as information. They include the quarterly department reports, the Middlesex London Health Unit, and Upper Thames Conservation Authority. Looking for a motion. Councillor Hunter, seconded by Deputy Elliott. All in favor? Perfect. Now moving on to, I know it's going to be finance because I see our Director of Finance on the screen. So F00122, amendment to Schedule B of Bylaw 84, 2021, 22 fees and charges bylaw. The floor is yours, Kim.
Thank you very much, Your Worship, and good afternoon, everyone. My report is before you requesting a change in the terminology that's included in our 2022 fees charges bylaw. The change is as a result of taxation training that was received in 2021, and the change does not affect the total collection of penalty and interest, but rather just clarifies when penalty versus interest is charged on an account. I would be happy to answer any questions that you may have at this time.
Council, any questions? Nope, seeing none. Then I'm going to look for a motion to, sorry? Yep. Deputy Mayor Elliott. Seconded by Councillor Hunter. All in favor? Tom, I think your internet's a little slower than Paul's. His hand goes up just before yours. Right, so moving on now to the mayor's report. It seems like a long time since we've been together, but our last meeting being on December 13th. December 15th, I attended the Kettle Creek Conservation Authority meeting. December 15th, I attended a planning advisory meeting with the county. December 16th, I attended Southwest Community Transit meeting, and then the county city liaison meeting, and then joined the health unit briefing with Dr. Alex Summers. January 3rd, we had the county emergency group update. January 4th, the health unit briefing. January 7th, I attended the women's focus group meeting hosted by Karen Vecchio. And January 8th, I attended the New Year's Eve levy, well, not really New Year's Eve levy, New Year's levy, hosted by Monty McNaughton for Lambton, Kent, Middlesex. And again, most of that was a virtual experience because here we are again, not being able to meet a lot face to face. Any unfinished business? Seeing none, then we have a notice of motion, and I'm going to pass the floor to Deputy Mayor Elliott where she can go through her motion.
Thank you, and through you, Your Worship. I do have a notice of motion in regards to the composition of the Thames Valley District School Board. It's a fairly lengthy notice of motion, but it is on the agenda and posted before you. Essentially, since it is an election year, Thames Valley District School Board Board of Trustees can make changes to the composition of their school board. Middlesex County, in their calculations at the school board, is considered a low population municipality, and we do not meet the requirements for 2 trustees. However, in the past, the composition has always allowed 2 trustees representing Middlesex County. And so my notice of motion is that Thames Valley District School Board deem Middlesex County as the low population municipality, and that we support the distribution for the 2022-2026 term being 2 trustees representing Middlesex County, 2 trustees representing Oxford, 2 trustees representing Elgin County, 6 trustees representing the City of London, and an Indigenous trustee appointed per the Ontario Regulation 462/97, and that we write a letter from the mayor and CAO regarding ensuring equitable representation that balances the rural interests with the geography of Thames Valley District School Board. And those letters go to Stephen Lecce, Steve Clark, as well as our local MPP, Jeff Urick, as well as the same letter go to the school board.
Excellent, thank you. Tom, did you have a question, or did you want to make that motion?
Oh, I would like to speak in favor of the motion and second it, if possible.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, so I think that as Deputy Mayor Elliott has brought forward on separate occasions, that this is a matter of disagreement in terms of the perceived growth of the county and specifically Thames Center. I think that we all have been very close to the new development that has been occurring over the last 10 years in our communities. And I think that for the sustainability of that continued development, we need to have a healthy and active school system for now and in the future. So I think that this definitely speaks to the heart of that matter. And I think that there will be additional light brought forward on it at our local school advisory committee once the report is tabled with our current development actual statistics.
Thank you. Any other comments? No, I would just like to thank Deputy Mayor Elliott for her work on this. It's really an important representation of the county, and it's always important that the county has its say in these important matters. So we have a motion on the floor. We have a seconder. I'm going to call the vote. All in favor? Pass. Thank you. So moving on to new business, CN Rail and Drainage. It seems like everybody has jumped on the bandwagon of this one. This is something that we had been dealing with by ourselves, and then we joined with the county with some other people that were going through the same thing, and now it's caught the attention of OMAFRA and also our AMO, our associations of municipalities of Ontario. So we have a letter, a template letter, and that the letter be sent to each recipient, copied in the letter and forwarded to AMO. So the motion being that the Ontario Minister of Agriculture, Food and Rural Affairs, letter dated December 23rd, 2021, and correspondence from the Association of Municipalities of Ontario dated 5th, 2022, regarding CN rail and drainage be received for information, and that the council approve the template letter attached to the agenda, and that the letter be sent to the recipient copied in the letter. So looking for a motion for this. Councillor Hunter, seconded by Councillor Heeman. Those with the most drains, I get to vote on that one. Deputy Elliott, did you have a comment? Yeah.
Yes, thank you, and through your worship. First off, I just want to thank our CAO as well as our drainage superintendent, the CAO in Southwest Middlesex, who have put a tremendous amount of work into this before AMO came in and came up with this. I know Thames Centre and Southwest Middlesex have teamed up and put in an extensive amount of work, as well as bringing this to Good Roads. Through Good Roads, we were able to have the meeting with CN Rail to discuss this. We're awaiting CN to come back to the table with us, with OMAFRA, and have a discussion about this. As well as to let you know, I will be raising the issue at our next board meeting in March at FCM. So essentially Ontario is the only province with a Drainage Act, and so Ontario is the only one experiencing these issues. So FCM staff don't necessarily feel it is an FCM issue, but we are going to be raising it through the Ontario caucus and trying to get some work done there. So there is a lot of support, not just the AMO going around on this issue.
Excellent. So I'm going to call the vote. All in favor? Oh, Councillor Heeman, did you have a question? Or are you just trying to beat the speed of the broadband?
Bit of both. Just a further comment that I think that as we look at sustainable infrastructure, this is a national issue when we require drainage when we have these increased severe weather events. So I applaud Deputy Mayor Elliott's work on continuing to advocate for us at the national level.
Great, thank you. All right, all in favor? Pass, thank you. Next, 11.2, joint and several liability support. This was something that we discussed quite a lot at the beginning of the new term of council with the province. It seems to have dropped off the earth for a little while, but it's back in front of us again. And we have a motion in front of us that whereas at the meeting held on October 21st, 2019, Council endorsed the Association of Municipalities of Ontario submission titled Towards a Reasonable Balance Addressing Growing Municipality Liability and Insurance Costs. And we sure have seen an increase in insurance costs of no fault of our own. And whereas of its meeting held on January 18th, 2021, Council supported the resolution of the municipality of Charlton and Dac requesting that the province of Ontario address municipal insurance cost. And whereas a provincial review of municipal joint and several liability was completed, but the results have not been released. Therefore, the Council of the Municipality of Thames Centre once again supports AMO's request for municipalities to support the 7 recommendations contained in the AMO submission to reestablish the priority for provincial action on this issue, to plan for resolution before the end of its current mandate, and that this resolution be sent to the Attorney General, the Honourable Doug Downey, and copied to the Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing, the Honourable Steve Clerk, and the AMO President Jamie McGarvey. Okay, any comments, Council? Deputy Mayor Elliott?
Once again, I'd like to thank our CAO for the amount of work he's done on this issue as well. This is something that we have been talking about this entire term of council. And we've been talking about it in previous terms of council. This is something that has been ongoing, that this provincial government said that they would address and hasn't happened yet. So I think it's important that we just keep on it. And so I will support this motion.
Okay, so you're making the motion. Seconder? Councillor Heeman, look at that. And all in favor? Thank you. No closed session today. We have some bylaws that the recommended motion is that bylaws 1/2022 through to bylaw 6/2022 be approved as presented. So we have 13.1, 13.2, 6. Okay. So any of those that anybody wants to discuss separately, are you comfortable passing them together? Okay, so looking for a motion to pass those bylaws. Councillor Hunter, seconded by Councillor Heeman. All in favor? Councillor Heeman, do you have a comment? No, just, okay. All right, our meeting schedule, Monday, January 31st, 2022 at 5 p.m. being our next meeting. I'm looking forward to seeing everybody there and looking now for a motion to adjourn. Councillor Hunter, seconded by Deputy Mayor Elliott. All in favor? Once more, Happy New Year, everyone, and we'll see you soon again.